Good morning, everybody. Kirk Nesbitt is the technical advisor of the Canadian Association of Broadcasters. The CAB is the national voice for Canada's private broadcasters, representing the vast majority of Canadian programming services, including private radio, television stations, networks, specialty, and pay-per-view services. Kirk is a professional engineer providing services to broadcasters, systems integration, and equipment supplies. He's the Broadcasting Committee Chair of the Radio Advisory Board of Canada, a member of the Ontario Emergency Alerting Steering Committee, and past chair of the Humber College Broadcast Broadband Convergence Lab Advisory Committee. Try saying that 8 times at once. All right, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Kirk Nesbitt.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today. Let's see if we get things working properly this time. Oh, we still got the bad display. I think we're just going to have to soldier through it and do the best that we can. So let's maybe wait a second. I'm not getting that duplication that you're seeing on my screen, so let's see what happens. No, we still got the same duplicate, but anyway, let's soldier on. So, for anyone new in the room, you've seen my standard introduction to introduce the CAB. But our technical coordinating committee is open to all CAB members, and I encourage participation from as many of you as can assist. Our main committee is chaired by Dennis Barrio of Dougal Media. He's officially retired, but we won't let him go. Our radio subcommittee chaired by Bill Stovall of Pattison Media, and the television subcommittee chaired by Clint Hollinger of Chorus. Now, most of our liaison with industry, with ISED, is through the Radio Advisory Board of Canada. Jim mentioned I chair the Broadcasting Committee, and we have a radio subcommittee chaired by Rob Brown of Pattison, and a Safety Code 6 subcommittee chaired by Julie Bergeron of CBC Radio Canada. So I was just last month out at the Western Association of Broadcast Engineers conference in Calgary, and their theme this year was bridging the past and building the future. And it occurred to me as I was putting the slides together, that is very much what our technical committee has been doing over the last while, and particularly the last year, as a number of standards with ISED are being updated and modernized. One that's still pending is that, back in 2022, we had an initial review of the site compliance and access control regulations for your transmitter sites that has to do with the signage and fencing and how you protect the general public from excessive Safety Code 6 levels. So that led to a public consultation which was launched in October 2023. But we've yet to see a final decision come from ISED. But what we do know, and what we have seen, is that it would appear more site inspections are being done, and we continue to reinforce that that no two sites are the same. So it's very difficult to have one rule that is going to affect everyone. When you try to compare between an urban rooftop with a FM or television antenna versus a mountaintop that is accessible or very inaccessible. So waiting on that one. Last year, ISED published an update of BPR3, which is the FM broadcasting regulations, and that incorporated HD radio into the FM regulations. This year, we had a review with ISED of BPR2, which is the AM broadcasting undertakings, and that draft incorporates hybrid AM HD radio, but not all digital AM, which has been adopted in the U.S., but not in this current version that we're looking at. So, comments were submitted January 27th, and we'll be waiting to hear, what the final result and final output comes from ISED. But in our CAB comments, we noted that the potential risk of first adjacent skywave interference, which isn't something that's currently incorporated into the AM rules or in the Canada-US agreement on broadcasting. But a very interesting development, I was at an NRSC meeting last week, and NRSC is the National Radio Systems Committee in the U.S., and we participate in a number of their working groups. Dave Hirschberger, who's a well-known broadcast engineer down there, has done some work for the NRSC that illustrates that interference, but he has also been able to demonstrate that you can mitigate that interference with DSP processing in receivers. So more modern designs of AM receivers can actually make a substantial improvement to make nighttime HD radio work on AM. Another update that we've been working on is an update to BPR10. The story here is that during the 600 megahertz repack, which was completed in January 2022, there was an interim broadcast procedure called BPR11, which identified all of the requirements for the repack. What has been done now is ISED has updated BPR10, which is the procedures and rules for DTV, to incorporate the necessary elements of that 600 megahertz transition into an updated document. So BPR11 rescinded, and then once published, we'll have a new BPR10 that incorporates those requirements. Another new one that we've been recently working on is SRSP, that's Standard Radio Systems Plan 301.7, which is the technical requirements for 1.7 gigahertz fixed radio systems, and that includes STL systems for studio to transmitter links. There's no major change in the document, but it's particularly relevant right now in that just recently I became aware that Bell is discontinuing its program transmission services. So that would, affect if you are using, leased lines or studio to transmitter links or audio links from remote news bureaus or remote program services like that. So it's, there certainly are alternatives, that you can look at with IP audio devices. But this seems to have come along very quickly, and if indeed the services are discontinued March 1st, 2026, then it could put some pressure on some people. So you might need to take a look at whether you can meet that deadline if you have those kinds of services and need to make changes. Certainly, if you were looking at trying to use a microwave STL system as an alternative to start now and get through the municipal planning and ISED licensing and building up the service, you'd be hard pressed to do that over the winter in 4 months. So that's why I wanted to bring it to your attention. And finally, on the ISED updates, BETS 6 is the technical standards for FM broadcasting transmitters, and the RABC will be reviewing a draft of that with ISED in the coming months. The main change is an extension of spurious emissions and cabinet radiation measurement requirements for transmitter manufacturers from third to 10th harmonic. So I hope that we'll be able to invite some participation from Nautel and their experts like Philip Schmidt and his colleagues there to have a look at that with us. On emergency alerting, there's definitely been some developments there that a year ago, the Common Look and Feel Guideline was updated to version 2.1, which has some pretty significant changes in it. When alert messages include 2 or more languages, that the LMD, which is last mile distributors, that includes radio and television stations, should present the full audience alert message in both languages or more. If LMDs receive an alert that is issued in both official languages, French and English, then both should be carried in the alert, regardless of where in Canada intended to broadcast. And LMDs may present alerts in additional languages as appropriate for the communities that they serve. And we already have examples of this in Nunavut, where they've been using some alerts in Indigenous languages, but because the system has not really been updated or made capable of that, it's creating some confusion and difficulty with emergency alerts up there. And finally, when presenting alerts in more than one language, the first language transmitted should be the principal language of the distribution medium. And that is maybe the one that broadcasters can agree with. The others definitely present challenges in that presenting, right now, or at least previously in the previous version of the CLF guideline, radio and television stations were permitted to broadcast only in their language of license. Presenting an alert in both languages is going to duplicate the alert or double the length of the message. And we already are struggling, I think, with some, listener and viewer fatigue and frustration and tune out if alerts are too long and confusing. So subsequent to that, the CRTC, which is the one who actually governs what the requirements are for radio and television stations to carry alerts, they've issued a notice of consultation calling for comments to improve the public alerting system for a number of additional factors as well. So the CAB is preparing a response to that consultation to address the questions in the notice review about improving accessibility for persons with disabilities, to facilitate dissemination of alerts in both languages. Whereas, I believe the CAB response will be to reiterate that we continue to believe that it is more effective to issue the alert in the language of license. To explore expanding the system to include Indigenous and additional languages, address potential wireless public alerting gaps, and review the existing public test schedule, which, as you know, we are mandated to participate in 2 national tests a year, usually in May and November. But as we go through year to year, not every province participates in those tests, but often for very good reasons. If it's during a period of time where there's a large number of actual alerts being carried, then it seems unnecessary to burden the public with an additional test. And the final point that they're looking for in this consultation is to determine improved methods to monitor and validate that LMDs are meeting their public alerting requirements. But we already have requirements in the annual returns that you file with CRTC to identify if you have had any technical difficulties with alerts that have been issued. So as I mentioned, we participate in the National Radio Systems Committee, and so there are a couple of interesting things I just wanted to bring to your attention that one of the working groups, which is the IBAC Standards Working Group, is developing a guideline G204 to create a guideline for consistent transmitter power display. The issue that was identified was that, in the user interface of your transmitter, you're often looking at a display that might say total power output, but it isn't necessarily total output that you are looking at or want to be looking at. This illustration provided by Nautel illustrates the example that in the first display in MP11 mode, where you've got additional subcarriers, there's 40% more IBAC digital carriers there. In this example, the analog transmitter power is 10 kilowatts, and each sideband is 700 watts. In MP1 mode, where, for only a single digital program service, the digital power is reduced, there are fewer subcarriers, is 500 watts, but you want to maintain that same 10 kilowatts. And the third example there illustrates the problem that you can run into, that if there is a dropout of the digital carriers, if you had automatic power control that was adjusting total power, then your analog power would kick up beyond your licensed power. So, the recommendation is that the user display should display the analog transmitter power independently. Another initiative that the NRSC is working on is coming up with a standardized method of multiplexing the FM and HD transport for FM stations to combine in an STL the analog HD multiplex channels and metadata all into one channel, and that's currently in development. I came across, I thought I would share it because I thought it was interesting, an article in Radio World by Nick Langen, where he took a look at HD radio, and his article is titled US HD Radio by the Numbers, but in fact he looked at all of North America, including Canada, so that was some interesting information there. In the article, and this is all just extracted from his article, so Xperi, HD Radio's parent, it's indicated there are more than 2,500 stations in the US broadcasting HD radio. 21%, that represents 21% of the commercial FM stations in the US. But important to understand as well, and the same effect in Canada, that 21% of stations represents more than 80% of radio listening because they're big major market stations. About 2/3 of US HD stations are carrying at least one subchannel, HD2, HD3, or HD4. And so approximately 1,400 active HD2 subchannels and the like, as you can see. So then in Canada, when you look at the similar situation, there are 51 out of about 1,700 stations across the country using the technology. Majority in Toronto with 16 HD radio stations, and so, and with Vancouver with 9, Montreal and Ottawa 4 each, so between those large markets, you probably are approaching 40 or 50% of radio listening in the country, even though it's still a relatively small number of stations. So, I thought that was interesting. Just, I'm not sure, because his analysis was based on looking at the US and Canadian databases of stations. And, there can be some duplication and errors in there. So I'm not sure that you should rely on those numbers as being 100% accurate, but they definitely paint a picture of the trend. And, I wanted to include it in my presentation just to stress once again the importance of metadata, and that we need to continue our conversation to help broadcasters remain competitive in the car dashboard, to ensure that we're not getting pushed aside with so many competing audio services available in cars now. So a couple of points in that regard. The North American Broadcasting Association presented a webinar to explore the business cases and opportunities for station managers, to try to bring them into the conversation about why metadata in the car is important, to accurately demonstrate station logos, to include album art and the like. But also, and maybe more importantly, to understand that there are revenue opportunities there as well. Many stations in the U.S. are now using services like Q Networks to manage their metadata and be able to create advertising opportunities. Some stations are carrying a continuous banner, even during music that's playing, that has text advertisers. And very often it's, personal injury lawyers and things like that, just running a banner under the music. But at least, while we're all struggling and looking for additional revenue, those opportunities need to be understood. There's an international organization called Radio DNS that has been developing hybrid radio for cars, using the wireless internet as a back channel to enhance the metadata available. One of the challenges that is being recognized around the world is that car makers are not doing this consistently, and when you do find errors, how do you address it? And so they're developing a website to create like a help center so that the general public or radio stations can put input into this. I'm in Toronto, my favorite station, pick one, is not displaying its logo properly in my pick your car, and then that can be relayed to the manufacturer, and then they can address the problem, and through continual improvement get a more consistent in-car experience for people. Thought that was interesting. Radio Player, which is one of the radio station aggregators in Canada. Their international division, Radio Player Worldwide, recently demonstrated a white label in-car app for radio stations. And that can help to address where some new car models are making it more and more difficult to access the radio in the car, and sort of driving the listener towards in-car streaming. So, yes.
Did you hear for BDR, they reported that Tesla Y model and something else, they were taking the FM radio out as well?
Yes, there are some trim levels of Tesla I've heard as well that don't have AM or FM radio. That's right. And another bit of news that I heard recently was, even though SiriusXM and their hybrid model, which they call 360L, which uses wireless internet as a back channel and to provide additional streaming content, that's been available in cars for a few years, but it was just announced that Toyota has adopted that for SiriusXM in the upcoming years as well. So they have a good opportunity to do a very good and consistent job of displaying metadata in the car, and that's what we need to be able to compete with. But because we all run different organizations, we need to keep the conversation going and work together to get that consistent display. This is just an image to illustrate that. This is from a Chevrolet that no longer has a radio button, There's on the touch screen, there's an audio icon, but you have to go 2 or 3 selections down if you want to be able to select FM radio or AM radio. So similarly, you want to talk about, bridging the past, building the future. We need to be aware of and having conversations about ATSC 3.0, or what is being called Next Gen TV. Dozens of U.S. stations are now broadcasting Next Gen TV and reaching more than 80% of the population. There are consumer products available in the U.S. from Hisense, Samsung, Sony, and TCL. And the FCC has provided some flexibility for simulcasting. And along with that, the NAB is developing what's called the Broadcast Positioning System as a complementary service to GPS. And there's a consultation with the FCC regarding finding a complementary system for GPS so that there's an alternative in case there are problems with GPS in the future. And so now some broadcasters, and particularly the NAB, is endorsing that the FCC should establish a sunset to shut down ATSC 1 in the U.S. and fully adopt ATSC 3. And so tomorrow, I think, is an FCC meeting where what the FCC does is when they have one of their upcoming meetings, they publish a draft of what they expect to discuss. And what supposedly will be discussed at this meeting tomorrow is a 5th further notice of proposed rulemaking, which would tentatively conclude that stations should be allowed to stop broadcasting ATSC 1 if they choose voluntarily, and start broadcasting exclusively in 3.0. And tentatively conclude that stations should be allowed to broadcast both ATSC 1 and 3, meaning simulcasting their services, but with fewer restrictions and requirements on their ATSC 1 signal. So meaning not 100% simulcast, but having some flexibility to allow them to have near simulcast and introduce some other programming on their ATSC 3 services. And also to see comment on other related issues, and in particular, a requirement that new televisions be able to receive and display 3.0 signals. Again, it's controversial in the U.S. The CTA, the Consumer Technology Association, is against having that mandate to require ATSC 3 in new televisions. The NAB is supporting the position that it should be included. So all of that just to make you understand that there is a debate going on, an important debate going on in the U.S. right now, and those decisions are going to affect us at some point down the road. So again, we need to be continuing the conversation about what does this mean for us. So ATSC 3 in Canada, Humber Polytechnic, not too far away from here, has their broadcast broadband convergence laboratory. And they have, I think now 4 over-the-air transmitters running in the Toronto area, and doing some ongoing testing with a number of different partners. You'll hear a lot more of that from Oris Sushko from Humber, who's going to be presenting, I think, later today. But they held a very interesting emergency management symposium. And this is where some of the capabilities of ATSC 3 can provide some really interesting opportunities for emergency management organizations. And there is definitely growing interest from Emergency Management Ontario and various cities, and triggered initially by the Calgary Smart City project, which I've talked about before, that they are going to be experimenting with a number of non-broadcast services over ATSC3, such as first responder communications, where they can, simultaneously provide evacuation routes or building plans simultaneously to police, fire, and ambulance services, giving them, a great deal more information. They'll be experimenting with dynamic road signs so that they can warn people if there is a traffic ahead, that to reduce the speed from 110 kilometers per hour to 80 or 60 or whatever is necessary to slow down that flow before they get into the crunch of a major accident ahead. Digital equity and distance education, where they've identified that a significant population in the Calgary region and across Canada is still in a situation where they don't necessarily have the right device at home for children to be able to access remote education, as we relied on so heavily through the COVID pandemic and similar situations. So they'll be experimenting with that. And also this broadcast positioning system as a complementary service to GPS. And that's not just about navigation. That's about providing an alternate time reference, which is essential for financial transactions and for power grid management. So, again, I think we just have to continue the conversation of how we navigate these various issues going forward, and I encourage you to participate in our CAB Technical Committee. Thank you. I have no idea how my timing has gone. If you have time for any questions, Jim, or...
Does anybody have any questions for Kirk? No? So everybody's got this all clear as mud and they all understand it, and Kirk hasn't confused anybody, so. All right.
Perfect.
Kirk, on behalf of the CCBE, we want to thank you for once again being here. It's always a pleasure. I like getting the updates. There's a lot of stuff in there already that I actually have questions about, but it's going to come up in some of the other papers, like you said. So, thank you very much for coming. Appreciate it. All right. Thanks, Kirk.